Today we're looking at how to go from production theory to cost theory. That is, we're going to look at how do our ideas about production that we learned in a previous video, how do they change a little bit into being a theory about cost. The theories aren't any different. The only difference is with production, our variables are inputs and outputs. Whereas with cost, our variables on the axes are quantity and costs, which is going to be convenient when we look for profit, because then we can look at quantity with revenue and make a comparison to figure out what our profit's going to be. We're going to look at it first on schedules. So here we have a production schedule, and this is going to be a cost schedule. Keep in mind these terms, variable costs are the ones that go up and up and up as I produce more and more. So these would be the raw materials that I'm going to produce from, electricity, workers, things like that. As I produce more, I have to buy or pay for more of these things to produce more. A fixed cost is going to be something like the office space that I'm working in. I have to pay the same amount whether I produce 1 or whether I produce 50. The amount doesn't change with production. In this example today, we're just going to ignore fixed costs. They're there, but for now we're just going to sort of leave them go. I do point that out though, because even though we're not going to talk about fixed costs, we are still talking about the short run. That is the time period in which you have at least some fixed costs. So just because we're ignoring them doesn't mean they're not there. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. Remember, in a production schedule, I look at the amount of inputs. Okay, so when I'm going down rows, the inputs are increasing by 1. Well, remember, because of the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns, that means my production is not going to increase at any sort of given rate. It's just going to increase based on the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns, specialization and things like that. So when I convert this information to cost information, what we don't have here is a cost. We don't know anything about cost from our schedule. So we have to make an assumption. And our assumption is going to be that if we hire 1 person, 2, 3, on down to 5, we're going to pay them the same amount, in this case, 24 euro. So 1 person costs 24, 2 people cost 48, so on and so forth. Now let's make one more observation before we start to move information across. In each of these, so in the 5th column, we notice that the total production stays the same as in the 4th row. Sorry, I said column before I meant row. So obviously, I'm not going to hire 5 people to produce 7 when I could hire 4 people to produce 7. I mean, maybe I'm being nice and giving somebody a job, but that's not really an assumption that we're working with. So, in reality, this option right here is probably not going to exist. So we're going to get to this point and stop. Do notice that I've color-coded here. That's going to be more important when I start to move information across here. Okay, let's have a quick look at our cost schedule. So we see quantity is the first column. And you see here the quantity, instead of going up at an irregular rate, it's going to go up by 1s to our maximum. So our lowest quantity obviously is 1, and our highest quantity was 7, so that's going to be what we put into our first column. As far as costs go, what we're going to have to figure out is, how did we make 1? Well, to make 1, we had to hire 1 worker. That's what the production schedule says. Therefore, the additional cost, so this is marginal cost, total variable cost, so it's going to be all the marginal costs added together. And then the average variable cost, which will be the total variable cost divided by the quantity. So the marginal cost of making this first one is the cost of hiring 1 worker. That is, it's 24 euro. Therefore, the total variable cost is 24. And obviously the average variable cost is 24 divided by 1, so 24. So that's obviously very simple. Well, what if I want to make a second one? Well, if I want to make a second one, I have to hire a second worker. Now, they're not going to come in and work for just a portion of the day, so I'm going to get a second, a third, and a fourth all together at the same time. So quantities 2, 3, and 4 are all the result of hiring the second worker. Remember, we're not saying the second worker is that much better than the red worker, we're pretending they're the same. The reason we get that advantage is because of specialization, time saving, the advantages that we see with scaling up production, with producing more. So, each of these three is sharing the 24 extra euro that I have to pay this guy. Therefore, our marginal cost for each of these three is 24 divided by 3, that is 8. Therefore, our total variable cost for the second one is 24 plus 8, 32. 32 plus 8 is 40, and then 48. When we do our average variable cost, we're going to see this number changes as well. So 32 divided by 2 is 16. So we notice this dropped, and it dropped by a margin of 8. So 24 down to 16. 40 divided by 3 is going to be 13.33. So this fell again, but it didn't fall by as much. This fell by 8, and this fell by only 2 2/3. 48 divided by 4 is 12. And again, we notice that it fell, but not by as much as it just did. This fell by 2 2/3. This fell by only 1 1/3. Okay, we want to produce more than 4, so we make the decision to hire a third person. So our total variable cost now is 72. This person adds 2 more, which means the marginal cost of those 2, the 24, is shared amongst those 2. So it's 12 and 12. Now we ought to instantly notice something. Marginal cost fell to 8, and now it's risen again to 12. Total variable cost in this case, 48 and 12 is 60. 60 and 12 is 72. And this is just kind of a coincidence. It's not really part of a theory. It's just how the numbers worked out. But here, 60 divided by 5 is 12. So again, you notice here that now it didn't drop. So it fell, average variable cost fell, then fell, then fell, then stayed the same. And they're going to stay the same here as well because 72 is divided by 12. Again, that's just math, guys. What you're always doing is you're looking at the added margin. So here's the marginal cost, and you're seeing how it affects the average. So since the marginal cost is the same as the average, it stays the same, obviously. If you had a class where the average height was 160 centimeters, and a new student comes in who's 160 centimeters, obviously the average height isn't going to change. When I look at the previous one though, the marginal cost, 8, was less than the previous average cost, therefore the average cost fell. All right, so we hire our last worker. This is the best that we can do, the most that we can produce. We start to produce less and less after that. And the marginal cost of this, they only get 1, so again the marginal cost is 24. The full 24 euros has to be paid to produce that 7th one. So our total variable cost is 72 plus 24, that is 96. And again, by the way, notice here that we see 96 there, 72 there, 48 there, and 24 there. So those numbers do show up. And then our average variable cost, 96 divided by 7, this is 13.71, of course. What, you didn't know that? So again, what we see here, so the total variable costs, we notice have gone up and up and up, but by changing rates, we see that changing rate in ABC. We see that the average variable costs have gone down, 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 and they've stayed the same, and now they're starting to come back up, and that would continue to happen. Likewise here, we see marginal costs fall and then increase. Notice that the increasing happens at an earlier point here than it does there. And this leads us to our last point, which is where do we see the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns? Well, you can't really see it in TBC, like you kind of can, but it's hard. It's easiest to see in marginal cost. We see that marginal returns improve, but right here, they got worse, right? 8 up to 12 is greater costs. Well, I'd rather not have to pay more. But notice that that continues to stay good up until this unit, and it's not until after that unit that average costs start to go up. So we can see the law of eventually diminishing marginal returns there. and there as well. Any questions or comments, leave them in the comments below.